Racist cop hangs black woman in court and is desperate when he finds out. She's the judge. Justice is supposed to be blind, but in the grand halls of Harris County Courthouse in Houston, Texas, prejudice still lurks in the shadows. A single day changes everything for those seeking truth behind the judge's bench and the uniform meant to protect. Nobody expects a trusted police officer, a guardian of the law, to become an embodiment of hatred, nor imagines that a simple courtroom proceeding can turn into a stage for terror. Yet when vile intentions collide with misplaced authority, fate has a way of unraveling even the most twisted plans. Brace yourself for an extraordinary tale of racism, resilience, and the ultimate reckoning. Timothy "Tim" Ross had always believed he was born to be a police officer. His father had served in the military, and his grandfather was a retired deputy in a small Louisiana town near the Texas border. Growing up, Tim idolized the uniform, the quiet authority, the solemn respect. As a child, he would stare at the crispness of his father's pressed pants and shiny badges with wide-eyed admiration. He dreamt of wearing the same uniform, upholding what he believed was a sacred duty to protect and serve. He joined the Houston Police Department at age 23. From the outside, Tim was exactly the kind of man the department wanted, fit, dedicated, and respectful to his superiors. He was polite to his neighbors in a suburban enclave outside the city, never failing to say a quick hi to the mailman or wave at the elderly couple 2 doors down. His wife, Sarah, found him charming when they first met. He possessed a boyish smile that occasionally broke through his stern facade. But behind that polite veneer lay a simmering resentment. His mother had once lost her job in a downtown boutique, claiming her position had been given to a less qualified minority. That seed of bitterness had grown in Tim over the years, carefully nurtured by toxic political commentary and extremist online forums. He embraced a specific narrative that America was being stolen from him and from people who looked like him. By the time Tim pinned on the Houston Police Department badge, his convictions were firmly in place, though he rarely showed them in public. He was proud that the department boasted a rich diversity of officers, but he secretly believed many of them were only there because of political correctness. Despite living in one of the most ethnically diverse cities in the United States, Tim never felt comfortable around people who didn't share his exact background. He saw difference as a threat, not a strength. Years passed, and his record with the department remained average. A few commendations for routine bravery, no major disciplinary issues, a handful of passing remarks that might have hinted at his deeper biases. Still, complaints were easily brushed aside. Tim was careful never to reveal too much, never to let his prejudices become overt. Instead, he quietly joined extremist groups online under pseudonyms, forging alliances with people who believed in white supremacy. He reveled in their digital camaraderie, finally people who saw the truth, as he told himself. In the sweltering Houston summers, Tim seethed as he drove through predominantly black neighborhoods, convinced that the people there simply chose not to succeed. He would come home and rant to Sarah about ungrateful citizens and thugs wasting taxpayer money. Sarah often urged him to calm down, to remember his oath, but Tim was beyond listening. Though she had her own biases, she found his newly inflamed rhetoric unsettling. Gradually, their marriage became a battleground of arguments, and the tensions that drove Tim's loathing only grew stronger when he felt unsupported at home. During an internal training session on cultural sensitivity at HPD headquarters, Tim sat with arms crossed, barely concealing his sneer as instructors talked about reducing racial profiling. He couldn't understand why they should police themselves excessively when they had real criminals to apprehend. The department's reliance on community outreach and de-escalation programs made him angry. "We're coddling them," he told a fellow officer who disagreed, though politely moved away from him in the break room. But Tim wanted more. He wanted to advance, to rise in rank, or, at the very least, to gain a measure of power that he felt was slipping away from him in everyday life. The opportunity came when he applied for and got assigned to a specialized detail, courthouse security. It wasn't necessarily prestigious, but it was stable. Officers there got to rub shoulders with judges, lawyers, politicians, people with influence. What Tim didn't realize was how drastically his time at the Harris County Courthouse would alter the trajectory of his life. He thought that being inside the seat of justice would fortify his belief in certain truths about law and order. Instead, it would become the stage for his darkest impulses to explode, an event that would send shock waves through the city and beyond. Those first few days in the courthouse were uneventful. Tim sized up the environment quickly. Metal detectors, echoing hallways lined with benches, harried attorneys balancing briefcases and Starbucks cups, and all manner of defendants being escorted to face their charges. He felt that fleeting sense of importance again. He was, after all, among those tasked to guard the very heart of justice. He scanned the people milling about the building with a critical eye. His prejudice always found renewed energy whenever he saw people of color. Some days he caught sight of newly robed judges, men and women whose experience and intellect demanded respect. But Tim did not respect all of them. One day he scowled at a Latina judge who breezed past him, too busy to notice the sneer beneath his forced smile. Another time, a black attorney tried to engage Tim in small talk. Tim responded with a curt nod and turned away. The seeds of animosity, hidden for so long, were about to bloom into a monstrous act. In a city known for NASA's Johnson Space Center and the proud legacy of the Houston Astros, the air crackled with tension that even the blazing Texas sun couldn't scorch away. Tim had no clue that fate was orchestrating a collision between him and a woman whose name he did not yet know, a woman who would upend everything he believed. Little did he suspect that an appointment at the Harris County Courthouse, a simple hearing, would spiral into an act of hatred that would define him forever. Nor did he suspect that the woman he would target was a newly appointed judge, ready to take her place on the bench, a black woman whose mere existence challenged the twisted ideologies Tim had come to hold dear. In the sprawling mosaic of Houston, the storm clouds gathered. Tim's path was set, and the city held its breath, oblivious to the tragedy that was about to unfold. Judge Janelle Avery was the talk of the legal community in Houston. At 37, she was one of the youngest judges appointed to the Harris County bench in recent memory. Born and raised in Houston's historic Third Ward, she had witnessed both the opportunities and the challenges that came with growing up black in the city. She excelled academically at every step, attending Booker T. Washington High School, then earning a full scholarship to Howard University. After law school at the University of Texas, Janelle returned to her hometown to serve as an assistant district attorney, determined to bring justice to communities she knew intimately. Her track record spoke for itself. She pursued corrupt officials with ferocity, she championed diversion programs for non-violent offenders, and she made a name for herself as a prosecutor who balanced compassion with unwavering diligence. In time, she moved into private practice and garnered respect for her ability to see cases from all angles. Her peers encouraged her to run for a judicial seat. When the opportunity arose, Janelle did not hesitate. She won the election decisively. But after her victory, life moved at breakneck speed, swearing-in ceremonies, media interviews, and celebratory receptions. Local news stations like KARL marveled at her energetic approach. She told a reporter, "Justice is more than putting people away. It's about making sure the truth sees the light of day, no matter what." Her radiant smile and warm demeanor belied the fierce intelligence that lit her eyes. Despite the celebratory swirl, Janelle was more focused on the reality of her new position. She was no stranger to the challenges awaiting her in a system historically biased against marginalized communities. She resolved to hold both defendants and law enforcement officers accountable. "Justice is not a one-way street," she often said. "It must run both ways." These words would prove prophetic in ways she could never have anticipated. That fateful week began with a flurry of case assignments, civil disputes, misdemeanor appeals, and one particularly high-profile criminal case involving police misconduct. Before she took the bench for the first time, Janelle requested additional briefings and late-night reviews with her clerks. She needed to know each case intimately. Her background as a prosecutor taught her the value of thorough preparation. In the labyrinthine corridors of the courthouse, staff whispered about the new judge's reputation. Some said she was too soft, focusing too much on rehabilitation rather than punishment. Others heralded her as a breath of fresh air, praising her empathy and deep understanding of the law. Whenever Janelle walked by, she commanded quiet respect. Lawyers who wanted to gauge how she might rule in their cases scrambled to glean insights from her past decisions. Nevertheless, Janelle proceeded with the same combination of empathy and rigor that had guided her entire career. On Wednesday morning, she arrived earlier than usual, before 7. Dressed in a sharp charcoal skirt suit, she carried a worn leather briefcase that had belonged to her mentor from her early days in the district attorney's office. She glanced at the docket, a routine procedural hearing, a couple of motions to suppress evidence, and a bail hearing for a case that was drawing more media attention than usual, an assault claim involving an off-duty police officer. That morning, Tim Ross was also in the courthouse, assigned to assist with security. It was standard protocol for officers to monitor the building's entrances and hallways and to handle prisoner transfers. Tim spent an hour at the main entrance, scanning visitors with a metal detector. He found it increasingly annoying that so many people of color shuffled past him into his domain of law and order. Each beep of the scanner grated on his nerves. After his shift at the entrance, Tim headed upstairs to oversee a corridor near the judge's chambers. He didn't realize he would be placed so close to Janelle's office. He had heard chatter about a new judge, a young black woman, as some of his like-minded peers had sneered. But Tim rarely paid attention to those details unless they impacted him directly. Meanwhile, Janelle was finalizing her notes for the day's hearings when she noticed a detail about the assault case on her docket. The defendant, who was an off-duty cop, was rumored to have connections to white supremacist groups. Another jolt of anxiety coursed through her. For all her professional poise, Janelle felt the weight of her responsibilities. She knew that handling cases involving law enforcement always meant scrutiny from both the public and the department. If this officer had extremist ties, the hearing would no doubt be contentious, a potential flashpoint for anger, both inside and outside the courtroom. That day, after a routine hearing on a minor drug charge, Janelle stepped out of the courtroom to review some files in her chambers. That was when Tim first saw her. He noted her polished stance, the aura of confidence around her. She didn't look at him. She seemed engrossed in her own thoughts. But Tim stared, his eyes darkening with an emotion that hovered between fascination and revulsion. He didn't yet know who she was. He simply saw a strong black woman walking with purpose in a hallway of power, and it stoked the embers of his hatred. In the elevator, Janelle's clerk casually mentioned, "Judge, I think the cop in that assault case might be associated with a local militia group." Her clerk's tone was cautionary, acknowledging a potential safety concern. Janelle sighed. It wasn't the first time she'd handled a defendant who had extremist beliefs, and she was certain it wouldn't be the last. But something about this one felt different, a sense of impending confrontation that she couldn't quite place. As the clock inched towards midday, the stage was set. Janelle prepared herself for another hearing in courtroom 4B, where she would rule on a bail motion for the off-duty officer. Tim, assigned to that courtroom for security, was about to realize that the woman he'd loathed on sight was not just anyone. She was the newly appointed judge who embodied everything he despised. In the swirling mix of personal vendettas, institutional biases, and a city grappling with its own identity, the two were on a collision course toward a tragedy that would shake the very foundations of justice in Harris County. At precisely 12:30 p.m., Tim Ross took his place by the door to courtroom 4B, scanning each person who entered. The looming hearing involving an off-duty officer accused of assault had piqued his interest for weeks. He might have known the man, or at least moved in some of the same circles. Though Tim kept his extremist affiliations quiet, he sensed a kinship with others who shared his beliefs. His curiosity about the defendant grew as the crowd filtered in. At 12:55, Judge Janelle Avery strode into the courtroom. For a moment, Tim stared, uncomprehending. This was the woman from the hallway, the one with the aura of authority. Now she wore the black robes that marked her role on the bench. Tim clenched his jaw so tightly that he could feel the muscles in his neck strain. A bitter taste formed in his mouth. His hand instinctively hovered near his service weapon, though there was no immediate threat. His mind reeled, thinking, they made her a judge. The irony was not lost on him. A black woman was about to preside over the fate of a white cop accused of assault. Rage simmered just beneath his controlled exterior. Janelle, for her part, paid Tim no special attention, merely nodding at the bailiff and attorneys before taking her seat. The hearing began with the usual formalities. The defendant, Officer Brian Keating, stood with his attorney, making the case that he was not a flight risk and should be granted bail. The prosecution argued that the severity of the assault, coupled with Keating's extremist leanings, demanded that he remain in custody. Janelle listened carefully, occasionally scanning the documents on her bench. Meanwhile, Tim's gaze flicked from the defendant to Judge Avery. The words from the attorneys blurred into the background. He seethed, convinced that no black woman judge could be impartial in a case like this, especially one involving an alleged racist cop. His mind churned with what he saw as the irony of the situation. She'll throw the book at him, just to make a point, Tim thought. This is exactly what's wrong with this country. When Janelle spoke, her voice was calm, reasoned. She cited case law regarding bail conditions for violent offenders. It was clear she took the allegations seriously, yet she also was meticulously careful, ensuring the defendant's due process rights were respected. Tim's anger warped every word she spoke, interpreting her poise as smugness, her fairness as condescension. After a tense half-hour of arguments, Janelle delivered her decision. Officer Keating would be granted bail, but only under strict conditions, including GPS monitoring and a stay-away order from the victim. She expressed concern over Keating's alleged affiliations, but noted that allegations alone did not justify denying bail outright. Prosecution and defense showed mixed reactions, but the matter was settled, at least for that day. In truth, Janelle had balanced the law with caution. She didn't want to set a precedent that undermined fundamental rights without substantial evidence. She also didn't want to overlook the very real threat Keating might pose if the accusations of extremist ties were proven. Her decision displayed moderation, yet Tim viewed it as a half-hearted nod to political correctness, fueling his outrage. She let him go just to show how impartial she is, he told himself, ignoring the logic behind her ruling. Court dismissed, and the room began to empty. Janelle briefly conferred with a clerk before stepping off the bench. As she made her way back to her chambers, she passed Tim, who stood stiffly at attention by the door. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met. Janelle offered a professional nod. Tim's face remained impassive, but a storm raged inside him. He forced himself to remain still, even though every fiber of his being wanted to shout, "Who does she think she is?" That evening, as Tim returned home, his thoughts were singularly focused on Judge Avery. He ignored Sarah's questions about his day and retreated to his office, where he logged onto a private chat room frequented by a small group of extremist associates. Under a pseudonym, Lone Star Knight, Tim ranted about the new liberal black judge who had no business presiding over cases of good cops. The online circle responded with predictable venom, validating Tim's anger and stoking it further. One user suggested that drastic measures might be necessary if the system continued to place imposters in positions of power. Tim typed a reply he would never have thought possible just a year ago. Sometimes the only way to save the system is to purge it. He stared at the screen, a sense of grim resolve setting in. He didn't know how or when, but he felt certain that something had to be done to stop what he perceived as the infiltration of his beloved justice system by people who, in his mind, didn't deserve to wield authority. The next morning, Tim arrived at the courthouse early, volunteering for any assignment that would put him in proximity to Judge Avery's courtroom. Something about seeing her again, about asserting his presence, fed his twisted sense of purpose. By 8 a.m., he was stationed near the staff entrance, using the plausible excuse of a heightened security need to patrol the area. Eventually, Janelle walked in, armed with a coffee cup and stacks of legal briefs. She glanced at Tim, offered a polite, "Good morning, officer," and continued on her way. He didn't respond, but she hardly noticed. She had a full docket to tackle. Throughout the day, Tim took every chance to observe Janelle's movements. He found out from a fellow officer that she was scheduled to hear arguments in another police misconduct case the following week, this one involving allegations of brutality during a protest. The irony felt too sharp. Another cop on trial, with a black female judge presiding. Tim's mood darkened further. He confided in no one, but the insidious plan forming in his mind took on a more vivid shape. On Friday, Janelle presided over a separate matter, a landlord-tenant dispute. Dull stuff for anyone not involved, but she handled it with her characteristic calm. As she deliberated from the bench, Tim stood in the back, arms folded across his chest, eyes locked on her every movement. His mind drifted to the noxious rhetoric he'd consumed online, the twisted fantasies of putting people like her in their place. He envisioned a scenario in which the balance of power flipped and she had to answer to him. The seeds of conflict were not just sown, they were starting to take root. In the tension-filled space between them, a violent destiny brewed, waiting for a spark. Tim's next shift would be a watershed moment, one that would cast aside his carefully maintained facade forever. And Janelle, for all her legal acumen, had no inkling of the storm that was about to break upon her. The city of Houston, proudly proclaiming its commitment to justice, was about to see justice tested in the most horrifying way possible. The weekend passed in a blur for Tim Ross. Every idle moment was consumed by dark fantasies of retribution. He spent hours scrolling through extremist forums, reading threads that only deepened his conviction. The anonymous egging on from online acquaintances emboldened him. Some spoke openly about targeting public officials. Tim found a sinister comfort in knowing he wasn't alone. On Monday, Tim saw an opportunity. A high-profile case in Judge Avery's courtroom had gathered local media outside the courthouse, so the building was teeming with people. Tim requested to supervise the holding cells in the basement, where defendants were temporarily kept before their court appearances. He used the request form's court familiarity box as a reason, citing his experience with prior detainees. The real reason was simpler. Those holding cells had restricted access, and Tim wanted a more private environment in case he needed it. The day began calmly enough with Tim pacing the corridors, but as noon approached, he discovered that Judge Avery would descend to the holding area to conduct a brief hearing involving a defendant with limited mobility. The defendant, an elderly man, couldn't easily ascend to the courtroom, so the judge was making an exception. The basement corridor near the holding cells was dimly lit and often quiet. Tim felt a twinge of excitement. In his twisted mind, the setting was perfect. He formulated a plan so shocking, so brazen, that any rational person would recoil. Yet Tim's hate-fueled logic overrode any notion of consequence. He reasoned that if he could confront Judge Avery alone, terrify her, or worse, he might send a message to others like her. "We won't stand for the corruption of our justice system," he told himself, rationalizing violence as a form of patriotic duty. Around 12:10 p.m., Tim positioned himself in the basement corridor leading to the holding cells. He knew the route Judge Avery would take. His heart pounded in his chest. He had no real plan for escape or evasion. This act was beyond reason. It was an eruption of hatred that had been simmering for years. The footsteps echoed before he saw her. She arrived with a single court clerk, a diminutive woman struggling with an armful of legal documents. A uniformed deputy trailed behind them. Tim considered the risk. I might have to get rid of the deputy first. But then the clerk's phone rang, and she stepped aside, urging the judge and deputy to continue. A stroke of luck for Tim. The clerk stayed behind, too distracted to notice anything else. Judge Avery and the deputy proceeded around a corner, out of the clerk's line of sight. Tim seized his moment, stepping forward. He addressed the deputy politely. "Excuse me, officer, do you mind checking something in the next cell block? I think there's a broken lock." The deputy, unsuspecting, walked away to investigate. That left Tim face to face with Janelle Avery in the hushed corridor. Janelle looked surprised to see Tim alone. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her expression neutral but curious. Tim gave her no answer. Instead, he swiftly reached behind his back and pulled a length of rope, a horrifying relic from home, one he'd acquired specifically for this purpose. In a blink, he lunged at her, wrapping the rope around her neck. Janelle let out a choked gasp, eyes wide with panic. Tim's mind raced with both adrenaline and malevolent clarity. He tightened the rope, ignoring Janelle's desperate attempts to break free. She clawed at his hands, trying to pry away the rope. She tried to scream, but the pressure on her throat rendered only guttural sounds. Tim forced her backward into a small, vacant storage alcove, not much more than a recess in the wall where old chairs were stacked. Her vision blurred as oxygen slipped away, but she fought to remain conscious. Tim's strength, amplified by his rage, overwhelmed her. As Janelle's senses dimmed, she thought of her family, her mother who had sacrificed so much, her father who had died too young. She thought of the countless defendants who needed her fairness, the city she had pledged to serve. "This can't be it," her mind screamed. In his frenzy, Tim dragged her into a position where he could attempt to hoist her. The corridor was low-ceilinged, but there was a metal support pipe overhead. He threw the rope over it, eyes wide with a vicious glee. This was not just a murder. This was a lynching in the ugliest, most racist sense of the word. Yet, in that chaotic moment, Tim realized he hadn't fully calculated the logistics. The overhead pipe wasn't that high. Janelle, still conscious, kicked out, managing to strike him in the shin. He stumbled, nearly losing his grip. It gave her a precious second to gulp air, to scream, a piercing, echoing sound that reverberated off the cinder-block walls. The scream reached the deputy investigating the so-called broken lock. He sprinted back, shouting, "Officer Ross, what the hell are you doing?" Tim knew his time was short. Fear coursed through him, blending with rage. His entire plan was collapsing. Undeterred by the deputy's presence, Tim resumed pulling on the rope. Janelle's eyes rolled back, her windpipe constricted. The deputy drew his weapon, barking orders for Tim to release her. But Tim had crossed a line of no return. He believed this was his moment of glory, his twisted stand against what he perceived as a corrupt system. Shots rang out. One bullet grazed Tim's arm, forcing him to drop the rope. Janelle collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath, her robe tangled around her legs. Tim howled in pain and fury, reaching for his own weapon. Another shot from the deputy shattered Tim's knee, bringing him down. He let out an anguished cry, dropping his gun and collapsing near Janelle. The corridor erupted into chaos as more deputies, clerks and attorneys rushed to the scene. Sirens wailed in the distance as an ambulance was summoned. The once quiet basement now buzzed with the realization that something profoundly evil had just transpired. The word spread through the courthouse like wildfire. A cop attacked the new judge. He tried to lynch her. In that moment, Tim's hatred lay exposed for all to see. His racist terror made flesh. As he bled on the cold concrete floor, handcuffs biting into his wrists, the magnitude of his crime hit him. He had tried to hang a black female judge in a courthouse basement in broad daylight. The shock was overwhelming, even to him, as if he couldn't fathom the atrocity he'd just attempted. Janelle was alive, but barely conscious. Medics arrived to stabilize her. Her throat bore ugly red welts, her breathing ragged. Even in her half-coherent state, she recognized Tim's face, the bigot in a cop's uniform who had nearly killed her, and as paramedics lifted her onto a stretcher, she clung to a single thought: I survived. In the swirl of medical intervention, radio chatter, and shocked bystanders, Tim Ross lay pinned to the ground. His career was over, his freedom lost. But far more than that, he had unleashed a monstrous crime that would echo through the city, and indeed the entire nation. Already cameras outside the courthouse began capturing footage of the unfolding emergency. The truth would not be hidden, it would be shown on every screen. The name Tim Ross would become synonymous with the ugliest side of law enforcement and the cancer of racism that still festered in American society. The news broke on every local station, KHOU, ABC 13, KPRC, flooding screens with urgent headlines: Racist cop attacks newly appointed black judge in Harris County Courthouse. Within hours, the story went national, dominating coverage on CNN, MSNBC, and even Fox News. Public outrage was immediate and intense. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, brandishing signs that read, "Justice for Judge Avery" and "End Police Racism." The Houston Police Department scrambled to release a statement condemning Tim Ross's actions, emphasizing that he acted alone and that his behavior did not reflect the values of the department. Tim was taken into custody, though he spent the first 2 nights at Memorial Hermann Hospital, where surgeons removed the bullet fragments from his knee. Under guard by armed deputies, he received no visitors except his attorney, a public defender hastily assigned to him. Sarah, his wife, did not come. She was in shock, reeling from the realization that the man she married had tried to lynch a black judge. Her phone rang incessantly with calls from friends, reporters, and complete strangers. She turned them all away, too devastated to speak. Meanwhile, Janelle lay in the ICU of the same hospital, her neck bruised and throat heavily bandaged. Doctors ran tests to ensure there was no lasting damage to her vocal cords. The psychological trauma was harder to measure. Family and friends visited in a steady stream, offering prayers and support. Even her mother, battling her own health issues, arrived in a wheelchair to hold Janelle's hand. The judge's mind replayed the attack in vivid detail, each second etched with primal fear. Yet, amid the horror, she felt a burning resolve. She had survived, and that survival fueled a renewed commitment to justice. The public's reaction was ferocious. Rallies erupted across the city. Social media exploded with hashtags like "Stand with Judge Avery" and "Racist Cop." Commentators debated the broader implications of a law enforcement officer turning so violently racist. Activists demanded systemic reform and thorough background checks to weed out extremist elements in policing. Houston's mayor and the police chief vowed investigations, policy changes, and a full review of Tim Ross's record. Within days, the Harris County District Attorney's Office announced a litany of charges against Tim Ross: attempted murder, hate crime enhancements, aggravated assault, and more. The weight of those charges almost certainly guaranteed he would spend the rest of his life in prison if convicted. Prosecutors promised a swift and thorough trial, mindful of the victim's high-profile status. Despite the unthinkable nature of his crime, Tim would be given the due process he had denied Janelle. When Janelle was stable enough, the police chief, along with detectives, visited her hospital room to take her statement. She recounted every detail she could remember: the rope, the desperate struggle, Tim's wild eyes. Her voice trembled and tears threatened, but she held herself together. The chief, a veteran of multiple crises, struggled to keep his composure. This was no routine assault. It was a racist lynching attempt within the sacred precincts of justice. The entire city's faith in its institutions was shaken. As word spread, the FBI opened an investigation to determine if Tim was part of a larger network of domestic terrorists. They confiscated his computers, combing through his email, browsing history, and those notorious chat rooms. Indeed, they found a disturbing web of extremist connections that suggested Tim was not alone in his ideology. Dozens of chats revealed infiltration fantasies, talk of taking back America, and detailed wish lists of public officials they deemed targets. The revelations alarmed federal agencies and heightened concerns about the broader infiltration of law enforcement by extremist elements. Hate mail and, conversely, messages of support flooded the hospital switchboard for Janelle. People from across the country reached out, sending cards, flowers, and letters praising her resilience. Prominent civil rights leaders visited. The local NAACP chapter organized a fundraiser for survivors of hate crimes, citing Janelle's experience as a galvanizing moment. She felt profoundly grateful yet overwhelmed, yearning for a return to normalcy that seemed impossibly distant. A week later, Janelle was discharged. Cameras flashed as she exited the hospital. She made a brief statement, her voice still raspy. "I stand here, grateful to be alive. I believe in the justice system, and I will see that justice is served for all of us, no matter our race, no matter our background." The crowd erupted in applause. Tears welled up in her eyes as she was escorted into a waiting car, heading to a secure location for her safety. Meanwhile, Tim faced life behind bars. Transferred to a high-security jail, he was placed in protective custody. Ironic, considering the violence he had inflicted. Other inmates viewed him with contempt, not just because he was a cop, but because his actions had drawn massive attention, making him a liability. His attorney tried to argue mental instability, trauma, anything that might reduce his culpability. But the evidence was overwhelming. Digital footprints, eyewitness testimony, even a partial security camera feed that captured his assault in the basement corridor. Sarah wrestled with the decision to visit him. Initially, she refused, but curiosity and a need for closure drove her to schedule a meeting 2 weeks after his arrest. The encounter was gut-wrenching. She found him unshaven, eyes sunken with desperation. "Why?" she demanded, her voice echoing in the visiting booth. "Was it me? Was it something I did?" Tim offered no coherent explanation. He rambled about losing control, about feeling that the wrong people were in power. Sarah stared at the man she once loved, now a stranger fueled by hatred. In that moment, she realized their marriage was irrevocably broken. She left him there, tears streaming, vowing never to return. As Houston tried to heal, city officials fast-tracked new guidelines for screening police recruits' social media and online footprints. The scandal forced the department to confront the uncomfortable truth. Extremist ideologies could fester within its ranks, if not actively rooted out. Committees were formed, new training programs introduced, and partnerships with civil rights organizations expanded. For Janelle, the recovery process was layered. Physical rehabilitation for her throat and therapy to deal with the emotional trauma. She struggled with nightmares and panic attacks, replaying the attack in her mind. In a show of unwavering support, her judicial colleagues insisted on covering her cases while she recuperated. Yet she felt a fierce need to return to the bench, to show the world that she would not be driven into hiding by hate. Late one night, while flipping through channels, Janelle paused on a documentary about Harriet Tubman. She found solace in the stories of resilience, especially of black women who had endured unimaginable cruelty, yet fought on. In their legacy, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She would go back to the bench, not just to resume her duties, but to symbolize a triumph over the darkest corners of racism. The echo of that basement corridor still lingered, but in its wake came a powerful surge of community solidarity. From the mayor's office to grassroots activists, a unanimous message resounded: acts of racist terror have no place here. And though the scars would remain on Janelle's body, on the city's conscience, they represented a sobering reminder that vigilance against hate must be ongoing. With the national spotlight on Houston, the trial of Tim Ross was slated to be one of the most significant hate crime cases in recent memory. Public interest soared, and legal experts speculated on every facet, from jury selection to potential defenses. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse holding signs, demanding life imprisonment, while a smaller counter-protest attempted to rally sympathy for Tim. That counter-protest was quickly overshadowed by the sheer horror of his crime. Janelle still bore the physical scars on her neck, healing but visible. She had to decide whether to attend the trial in person. Initially, she felt too fragile, reluctant to relive the trauma, but as the date loomed, she concluded that her presence would serve as a testament to survival and an unequivocal statement that hate would not win. Supported by her family, close friends and colleagues, she took her seat in the courtroom's front row. On the opposite side, Tim's defense team faced a near-impossible challenge. The evidence was irrefutable: a partially captured video, forensic proof of Tim's involvement, and eyewitness accounts. Their strategy hinged on painting Tim as mentally disturbed, citing pressures from his job, marital stress, and extremist indoctrination. They emphasized Tim's so-called break from reality. However, it was difficult to reconcile this with the planning evident in his bringing a rope to work and lying in wait. The lead prosecutor was a seasoned attorney named Kimberly Rhodes, renowned for her zero-tolerance approach to hate crimes. In her opening statement, she depicted Tim's actions as a modern-day lynching, a premeditated act rooted in white supremacy. She detailed the historical context of lynchings in the United States, referencing the haunting imagery of racist terror. "What we have here," she told the jury, "is not mere assault, but an assault on the very soul of justice." Tim's attorney attempted to shift blame, suggesting that extremist websites had fueled his delusions. He was coerced by online radicals, the defense claimed. But cross-examination of witnesses revealed Tim's long-standing prejudices, his mother's resentment, his father's subtle racism, and Tim's own digital footprint. In one chilling piece of evidence, the prosecution read aloud Tim's online posts advocating for acts of resistance against black officials. The jury visibly recoiled. Throughout the proceedings, Tim sat hunched in an orange jumpsuit, no longer the crisp uniformed officer. He avoided eye contact with Janelle. Once or twice, he glanced her way, his face flickering with an indescribable mixture of anger and shame. But mostly, he stared at the table, as if hoping to vanish. Janelle found her pulse quicken when she heard the detail of how Tim had planned to purge the system. Each retelling of the assault stabbed her psyche anew. She gripped her mother's hand, trying to maintain composure. She reminded herself that her very presence in the courtroom, breathing and alive, was a victory. The trial lasted just over a week. The defense tried to mitigate blame by calling psychologists to testify about Tim's susceptibility to radicalization, but their arguments paled against the sheer brutality of his act. Multiple witnesses, court staff, deputies, even the paramedic who treated Janelle, spoke to the viciousness of the attempted lynching. The images of the rope and the bruises on Janelle's neck, displayed on large screens, left the jury visibly shaken. In closing arguments, Kimberly Rhodes delivered a passionate appeal. "This was not a momentary lapse," she declared. "This was hate, planned and executed in a place meant to uphold justice." Tim's attorney begged for leniency, citing mental health issues and the remorse Tim purportedly felt. The jury left to deliberate, and the city waited with bated breath. It took less than 5 hours for the jury to return a guilty verdict. Tim Ross was found guilty on multiple counts, including attempted murder under hate crime statutes. The judge, an older man with decades on the bench, looked solemn as he pronounced the sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole. Gasps filled the room, mingled with relief for many. Tim's face remained impassive, though Janelle noticed a slight tremor in his hand, a final betrayal of fear. For Janelle, the verdict was a bittersweet vindication. Justice was served, she thought, though it did not erase the nightmares nor the lingering ache in her throat. As she left the courtroom, camera flashes burst around her like strobe lights. She faced the press briefly, offering a statement. "I thank the jury for upholding the rule of law. I will continue to stand for justice in every capacity I can. Hate has no place in our society." The press clamoured for more, but she left it at that. In the following days, public reaction was largely supportive. Civil rights groups hailed the sentence as a milestone in combating hate crimes. Some within law enforcement circles quietly expressed relief that a clear message was sent. Racists would not be shielded by a badge. Yet others in extremist corners of the internet raged, calling Tim a martyr. Threatening messages surfaced, though none amounted to more than digital posturing under FBI scrutiny. Tim Ross was transferred to a maximum security prison out of state for his own safety. He became a pariah among inmates for his crime. Lynching attempts on a female black judge wasn't exactly a story that earned respect. Guards watched him closely, aware that any mention of him in the media could incite violence behind bars. In the wake of the verdict, the city of Houston took a collective breath. Demonstrations tapered off. The basement corridor of the courthouse was fitted with more surveillance cameras and repurposed for storage. Few people wanted to walk the place where horror had reigned. For Janelle, the path forward lay in focusing on her recovery, both physical and emotional. She began attending therapy sessions, speaking publicly about the experience in measured tones. Offers to do interviews came pouring in from major news networks. She accepted some, hoping her story would shine a light on institutional racism and the dangers of unchecked hate. With each telling, she regained a piece of herself. Months passed, each day carrying Janelle further from the nightmarish assault. The bruises on her neck had faded to faint marks, but the memory remained as sharp as ever. Her voice, once silky, carried a slight rasp now, an audible reminder of what she had endured. Some days, she felt fragile, haunted by flashbacks. Other days, she felt fierce, determined to use her platform to enact change. Therapy became a lifeline, allowing her to process not just the attack, but also the weight of survival. The physical scars were easy to chart, but the emotional ones were trickier. She worried about stepping back into a position of authority. Would the fear consume her? Could she preside over cases without recalling the terror of nearly dying? But Janelle was no stranger to adversity. She had grown up in a neighborhood often overlooked by city planners, thrived in a legal system that wasn't always welcoming to black women, and persevered through every challenge thrown her way. The lynching attempt, horrifying as it was, became another crucible. She emerged from it resolute, guided by the spirit of countless black Americans who had faced down racism and refused to be broken. In due time, Janelle resumed her seat on the bench, presiding over a case involving police brutality, an irony not lost on anyone present. Cameras recorded her return, capturing her calm yet determined demeanor. Some in the audience were worried she might appear biased, but Janelle exhibited the same balanced approach she'd honed throughout her career. She gave each side equal opportunity, ruling strictly by the evidence. The final verdict was measured, further solidifying her reputation for justice unclouded by personal revenge. Yet, outside the courtroom, she channeled her personal experience into advocacy. Alongside community leaders, she formed an initiative called Justice for All, aimed at addressing systemic racism within law enforcement and the courts. She pushed for mandatory cultural competency training, psychological evaluations, and rigorous screenings for extremist ideologies among new recruits. Meetings were held with state legislators to propose new legislation requiring continuous oversight of officers' conduct and affiliations. The public response was mixed. Many hailed her actions as overdue reform. Critics accused her of being anti-police. Janelle calmly countered that holding officers accountable was the truest form of supporting law enforcement, as it upheld the integrity of the badge. Her viewpoint gained traction, thanks in no small part to her personal ordeal, which resonated as a stark warning of what could happen when hate goes unchecked. While Janelle pushed for change, Tim Ross languished in prison. Reports surfaced of him being attacked by fellow inmates, resulting in a transfer to solitary confinement for his own safety. The man who once believed in white supremacy and the inherent superiority of his uniform was reduced to a lonely existence in an 8-by-10 cell, haunted by the enormity of his crime. Occasionally, extremist groups wrote him letters, offering twisted words of admiration, but their support felt hollow in the face of his day-to-day reality. Sarah, having divorced Tim, started a new life in another state, free from the shame and scrutiny he had brought upon their family. She rarely spoke of him, trying to forge a path untainted by hatred. In quiet moments, she grappled with questions about how she'd missed the signs of his escalating racism. But acceptance and forgiveness, of both him and herself, were slow, painstaking processes. Over time, the city of Houston managed to heal. As part of the renewal, a mural went up on a wall near the courthouse, a striking image of a black woman holding scales of justice, framed by the words, "We stand for truth." Though it wasn't officially recognized as a portrait of Janelle, everyone knew who inspired it. The mural became a place where people gathered to reflect, pray, or simply remember the painful lessons learned. For Janelle, life became a delicate balance of professional duty and personal healing. She found moments of joy, dinners with friends, weekend trips with family, nights at home with her cat curled in her lap. She laughed more, finding solace in the everyday victories that racism could never take away. In those quiet times, she realized that surviving had given her a new perspective. The fragility of life underscored the urgency to make every day count. In court, she continued to wear her robe with pride, symbolizing a justice system that, however imperfect, could be a force for good if wielded by those determined to uphold its highest ideals. And each time she entered her chambers, she paused to center herself, breathing deeply and reminding herself of the vow she made in that hospital bed. Hate will never silence me. And so, in the heart of Houston, justice found a way through unimaginable darkness. Tim Ross paid the ultimate price for his hate, locked away from a world he once believed he controlled. Judge Janelle Avery carried her scars with courage, turning a harrowing ordeal into a catalyst for systemic change. Hers became a story of resilience and the unstoppable power of a community united against intolerance. If this tale moved you or made you think about the fragility and necessity of justice, please show your support. Like, share and subscribe to our channel for more stories that illuminate critical truths and uplift the human spirit. Your engagement helps ensure these narratives reach more people, sparking discussions that can change minds and shape a fairer future. Thank you for watching, and remember, true justice depends on all of us standing up against hate wherever it lurks.